been almost 3 years and you think I can figure out what the best angle is, but I really can't. Hey folks, my name is Jen, and today I am here to talk to you all about all of the books that I read in December. Alright, let's do this. So in December I read, well, technically I read 10 books, but I counted it as 11 because I read one of those books twice. The first of the books that I finished in December was Death in a White Tie by Niall Marsh. This is following Inspector Roderick Allen. This is number 8, I believe, in the Roderick Allen series. Inspector Allen recently has asked a old family friend of his for some help with a blackmail case. He's trying to get more information about a blackmailer who has been targeting rich society women. And so he enlists this family friend's help. This family friend is also kind of within society, and he's like really popular and kind of moves throughout the crowds pretty much. Unfortunately, sticking his nose into this business gets the man killed, so Alan takes it upon himself to track down who killed his friend and make sure that they get brought to justice. So in the other Niall Marsh book that I read previously, I think I read it in November, actually I have it right here, A Man Lay Dead, which is the first Roderick Allen novel, I didn't really like how this was written, and I didn't really like how Roderick Allen was portrayed in it, because it just felt like he was a mysterious character. And it was really hard to figure out like what kind of person he was, what kind of detective he was, just based on how things were written in here. And it almost felt like maybe Niall Marsh wasn't really 100% sure what kind of character her character was. But by this, it's like number 8 in the series, it really feels like he is a fleshed out character, and we know exactly the type of man he is and the type of investigator he is. And I really enjoyed that about this. I think this was much better than the first one that I read, and really liked him. I found him to be brilliant and funny and charming, and actually also kind of emotional in this series, because he has lost a close friend and he kind of feels like this is partially his fault. He also has a lot going on with a romance, or like a woman that he is very into, but things I guess didn't go so well previously with their potential relationship, so he's also grappling with that within this book as well, which I also really like to see more about, like that of things going on in his personal life. We see his interactions with his own family, which I also found enjoyable and good to get more insight into him overall as a character. Just because like he was a more enjoyable character, and because we had this more personal element of him being kind of involved in this case, i.e. trying to bring his friend's killer to justice on top of figuring out who's been blackmailing all these society women. I thought that really added to the story overall, and I was so much more invested in it than I was in the previous book that I'd read. This was a really twisty-turny mystery, and there was this very kind of detailed and complicated dance between the police and figuring out who the blackmailer was and catching them. And I pretty much enjoyed my whole way through this read, and yeah, it gave me a lot of good feelings about the other books that I bought in this series, because I was a little nervous about how things were going when I finished this, because I didn't like it that much, but this just made me think, okay, I'm invested now in what's going on with this investigator. so I ended up giving this 4 stars. Then the next book I read was How the Grinch Stole Christmas, and this is the movie novelization of the book. It is the Jim Carrey version. It was adapted by Louise Gickow, and I like it because it comes with like color photos from the movie, which I think is pretty great. Yeah, this is just the movie novelization of the Jim Carrey version of How the Grinch Stole Christmas. I got this years ago when this came out because as a kid I was super into collecting movie novelizations of movies that I'd enjoyed, so I have a few of them. It was just something that I was really into at the time. So yeah, there's not really too much to say about this. It just kind of follows the course of the movie. Plus there's also a couple of scenes that were added in here that weren't really in the movie. We just kind of see from one scene and then it pops into the next scene. Here we get kind of the in-between bits that aren't within the movie, so that was kind of cool. Humor in here is really silly, but I mean, it's for kids. It's going to be really silly, and that was also enjoyable. I will say it wasn't the most well-written thing ever, but I mean, it doesn't really have to be. This is just pure entertainment. So just on that alone, just the fact that this is pure entertainment and it was kind of like funny, I did give this like 4 stars. The next book that I read was Midwinter Murder by Agatha Christie. So this is basically a collection of short mysteries that are kind of Christmas or winter themed. Within here we have Three Blind Mice, which Three Blind Mice is what the play The Mousetrap is based off of. It was my favorite the last time I read it. It was my favorite this time. I just really enjoy that tale. I think we get to see really interesting characters and a rather interesting conclusion and motive and stuff like that. So I really like that. The Chocolate Box, also loved it. That's an early case of Poirot, and I really thought that was a cool one. Christmas Tragedy is a Miss Marple mystery, which is always enjoyable. The Coming of Mr. Quinn is of course Mr. Satterthwaite and Harley Quinn, which those stories are really good. Like I have read all of the Mysterious Mr. Quinn at one time, and I would like to reread those at some point because I remember them being really entertaining and going off the fucking walls by the end of it. So yeah. Then we have The Clergyman's Daughter and The Red House, which are both and tuppence. There is The Plymouth Express, which is a Poirot. Problem at Polynesia Bay, which is a Parker Pyne mystery, which to date is the only Parker Pyne mystery that I've ever read. I don't know if I like him as much as Poirot and Miss Marple, but I wouldn't mind checking out more of his mysteries in the future. Sanctuary is a Miss Marple mystery, which I really enjoyed. The Mystery of Hunter's Lodge is a Hastings and Poirot. World's End is Mr. Satterthwaite again, and Harley Quinn, which was also enjoyable. The Manhood of Edward Robinson is like a kind of a standalone thing that was just, I think that was my least favorite out of the bunch, to be honest, but it's not a terrible thing. It's just, I don't know, I have mixed feelings about it. And then the final mystery in here is The Christmas Adventure, which is another Poirot, and I've read like a different version of that as well, and I think that's also one of my favorites as well. Overall, it's entertaining to read, especially during winter time, although there are a couple that aren't really wintry based, and it's kind of like why it takes place in like a tropical area, so it doesn't feel very holiday-like, but it's fine. So this, I started it reading the physical copy, and then I finished listening to an audiobook of it, which the audiobook was also pretty good. I can't remember who read it. I will try to look it up and put that in the description box below. I think this was a solid look at a bunch of her characters all the way around, but yeah, like I said, Three Blind Mice is still my favorite out of this bunch, and I gave this 5 stars. The next book I read is the one that I read twice, and that was Christmas Carol by Charles Dickens. So firstly, I, as tradition, listened to an audiobook of it while I was working on presents, and I have listened to a couple of different audiobooks of A Christmas Carol. In fact, I think I've listened to like 3 different audiobooks of it. I know one of them was a LibriVox one, which wasn't too bad. Another one was, oh, I think it might have been Jim Dale or Stephen Fry. It was either Jim Dale or Stephen Fry reading A Christmas Carol. I can't remember which one of them, but that one wasn't too bad either. But honestly, the one I listened to this time, and it's the one that I love the most, is by Tim Curry. Tim Curry is just fan-fucking-tastic at narrating this story. He narrates it so well, sucks you in, and the voices he does are just impeccable, especially like the ghost ones. He is so good at being creepy with like Jacob Marley and the Ghost of Christmas Past, and it's so good. He does an amazing job, and yeah, it's my favorite audiobook version of A Christmas Carol, and it's the one that I would most definitely recommend. I also really loved rereading the physical copy of this. There's just something about this book that I love so much. The dry humor that's in here, I love. There's a little bit of morbid humor that I'm also a big fan of. I just love the descriptions. They are absolutely beautiful and gorgeous. I don't want to spend time like sharing them right now because that'll make that too long, but if you're interested in hearing my thoughts and my favorite like passages from this and like my thoughts about other like Christmas Carol movie or TV adaptations, you can check out like my Christmas Carol chat that I did back in, I think it was 2020, and I'll try to like put that link like either here or at the end or something like that, so you can see that if that is something that you're interested in. I know that this is like past Christmas, so maybe it's not so much anymore, but yeah, I just love this, and I love the creepy bits. I think that's great, and I never really understood that part of like it's the most wonderful time of the year when they're talking about scary ghost stories and tales of the glories of Christmases long ago. I think that that's probably a reference to Christmas Carol, I believe, because it's just ghost stories. I love it. I just think it's so beautiful and Christmassy, and there's a lot of quotes that I love from this, and I think it has an important message overall. It's like one of my most favorite books of all time. I was going to annotate it this time because I had enjoyed annotating one of my other favorite books, The Shining, so much in October, so I was going to annotate this copy this year, but then I ended up not doing that just because I was losing my mind with like getting things ready and done for Christmas, so I ended up not doing that, but I do want to do that at some point. Yeah, this is always going to be a 5 for me. Then I was working on stuff. I listened to an audiobook of The 13 Problems by Agatha Christie. That is a collection of short mysteries, and they are all related to Miss Marple. Basically, the collection starts with a gathering of people that are together for the weekend, I guess. Miss Marple is visiting her nephew, the author Raymond West, his girlfriend, I guess, and then some other folks, a doctor, a retired man, an inspector from like Scotland Yard, and like there's a couple of other characters, and this after dinner they're relaxing, they're hanging out, and Miss Marple, everybody starts talking about like mysteries, and let's share about mysteries that like everybody else might not know the solution to, but the person telling the story knows the solution to, and then everybody else has to figure it out. And it's so funny because they underestimate Miss Marple entirely because she's just a sweet elderly old lady sitting in the corner knitting, and they don't really think that, you know, she's going to take part in this, and she manages to figure out the solution every time because it's Miss Marple and she's just freaking brilliant. So it starts out with that, and then it continues on through other like cases that occur here and there, people are involved in and stuff like that, and it's just so good. I think my favorite one might have been the concluding story because I just really loved how it felt like everything came full circle. But I really enjoyed listening to this collection entirely. It was incredibly entertaining. I love Miss Marple, and I love how she's like usually underestimated but basically shows everybody up all the time. She's wonderful. Even though Poirot is probably my favorite character that Agatha Christie ever created, I do still really love Miss Marple, and I find myself having a soft spot for her the more of her mysteries that I read over time. So I really enjoy that, and I gave that 5 stars. Then I read The House with the Chicken Legs by Sophie Anderson. So this is following Marinka, who is a young girl who all she wants is a real friend. Unfortunately, her only friends are her adopted jackdaw bird and the House of the Chicken Legs, which she lives in with her grandmother, the Baba Yaga. It's really hard for Marinka to have a real life friend just because they don't really consort with the living all that much because they're, you know, odd. They move around a lot, and their jobs are to usher the dead on to the next, you know, wherever they're going. So the Baba Yaga is like doing this, and she's also trying to train Marinka to do this job, but Marinka is feeling like she wants to choose her own path in life, basically. When she gets a chance to make an actual friend, things end up going kind of terribly wrong. So with this book, I enjoyed the lore and this particular take on the Baba Yaga tale. I found that to be pretty fascinating. I really loved the house itself. I thought that as a character it was really great. I loved the personality that it had, and how that kind of personality came out over the course of the book, and I really enjoyed it. I thought it was a pretty cool house, and I really liked that. The thing that I didn't like overall about this story was Marinka, and unfortunately she's like the main character, so that made this book kind of hard to get through, to be honest. I started reading this officially back in I can't even remember when. I feel like I might have started it ages ago, just ages ago, last year, sometime during like the summer, and then I put it aside, and then I started up again in September, and then put it aside, and then finally managed to finish it in December. I just keep coming back to it every now and again because I just had the hardest time getting past Marinka's passages because I didn't really like her. I didn't really like her as a character. I didn't really like the things that she said, the things that she thought, the actions, her actions, the things that she chose to do. I just found her kind of unlikable, and it's usually pretty hard for me to get through a book when I find the main character really unlikable. So that was like the damper for this story overall, basically. I have to say this wasn't that bad of a book, but considering the book that I read by Sophie Anderson in 2021, The Girl Who Speaks Bear, how much I loved that book, how emotional that book made me, and how it ended up being like one of my favorite books of the year. Like, I don't know, I guess I was expecting to enjoy, it's probably not fair to this book that I was expecting to enjoy this as much as I enjoyed The Girl Who Speaks Bear, despite them being like different books, even though they are dealing with both of them Russian lore. but yeah, I don't know. I ended up giving this book like 3 stars. Then I read A Caribbean Mystery by Agatha Christie. So this is another Miss Marple mystery. This is following Miss Marple when she is on vacation in the Caribbean. Her nephew has sent her on vacation to this like tropical island to, you know, have some relief for her rheumatism. So she is spending her time at this hotel and getting to know the proprietors, the staff, and the other guests that are at the hotel. There is a particular guest who is, he's an old soldier named Major Palgrave. He is like, you know, telling her all kinds of old stories about his time over there and about different people that he's interacted with and known over the years. And he ends up piquing Miss Marple's interest because he starts talking about a murderer that he once knew, and goes to show her a photograph of this murderer that he once knew, but ends up getting interrupted before he can show her and talk to her about it. And that interruption ends up proving fatal. So Miss Marple gets pulled into a mystery, which was exactly kind of what she was looking for because she was really bored otherwise. So this story had some pretty good twists and turns. Overall, I did enjoy it. I basically fell for a red herring that was in here, so I bow down again to Agatha Christie because I was not even close to who is the culprit. So yeah. I really liked the humor that was in here. There was that subtle kind of self-deprecating towards how British people act thing that Agatha Christie always ended up doing in a lot of her books, which was kind of funny, and how people behave in her societal like observances and stuff like that. I really enjoyed that element of it. I also, the part that I really enjoyed the most, I think, is Miss Marple. We got a little bit more insight into Miss Marple, how her brain works, how the kind of person that she is, and stuff like that. And I really enjoyed that. I really enjoyed getting to know her a little bit better, getting inside her brain a little bit more, and yeah, I really liked it. She's definitely growing as a favorite character of mine. There were a couple of outdated scenes, or rather, scenes or views of an outdated nature that were kind of bigoted that I wasn't fully on board with, and I know that it's like a sign of the times basically, but that kind of dimmed my enjoyment about this book overall and is what dropped it by like a star basically. But overall I still, for the most part, did enjoy this mystery, and I ended up giving this 4 stars. The next book that I read was actually another audiobook while I was working on Presents, and it was, I listened to the audiobook of How the Grinch Stole Christmas by Dr. Seuss. So this is like the original picture book. I actually don't own a copy. I should look for a copy. I really should, because I love it. I think that next to the Lorax, those are both my favorite Dr. Seuss stories. Yeah, so the audiobook that I read was the one by Boris Karloff, who is the one who narrated the actual animated movie, the one from like the 60s. So that was kind of fun too, because it also did like a little bit of the music sounds and stuff like that, the music, you know, everything. So that was pretty enjoyable. I mean, you gotta love the tale. It rhymes, it's cute, it's kind of funny. It's a dude just out there stealing Christmas and then changing his mind because he understands what Christmas is about, and it's, I don't know. I love it, but I do have to say that the whole time I was listening to it, all I could picture in my head was basically Jim Carrey as the Grinch reacting to certain lines when they are narrated. in his version of, I think it's narrated by Anthony Hopkins, or it's stuff that like he says and then is like, oh, why am I rhyming? You know? But that's what I could think about the entire time I was listening to it, though. But I mean, that's not necessarily a bad thing, it's just kind of funny. So yeah, I really enjoyed that audiobook, and I think it was a pretty good one. Yeah, I gave that 5 stars. Then I read Christmas Stories. This is a little collection by Charles Dickens. To be honest, I wasn't 100% sure by the end of this how they all were Christmas stories, because for the most part these weren't really related to Christmas at all. There were a couple that seemed to take place during like the winter season, I guess during the holidays a little bit, but the other ones not so much. I guess maybe back then Christmas stories didn't necessarily have to take place at Christmas time. It was more like, maybe it was like a moral thing that they were trying to get across, and that's when you listen or read these tales. I'm guessing that's why some of these were like, you know, in a Christmas story collection. So the first and longest of the ones in here was The Cricket on the Hearth. And I started out with mixed feelings about that story in general, just because one of the characters that was introduced, I felt like it was a pretty non-favorable stereotype from a lower class, I guess, and I think that it was not coming from a nice place necessarily, but I mean, by the end of it, I was just kind of sucked into the story, and I was enjoying where things were going. By the conclusion, I enjoyed it. Captain Richard Doubledick was such a odd story that over the course of it just gave me a lot of emotions that I was not expecting to feel by the end of the story. And the same goes for Dr. Marigold's Prescriptions. I wasn't really sure where things were going for a while there, but by the end of it, again, emotional. But that also might partially just be me around the holidays. I don't know. The story The Holly Tree, which was the story that I thought was most related to Christmas, was the oddest one, and I think it was my least favorite tale out of the bunch. There was a story within a story with that tale, and the outlying story about a man who thinks he has lost his love and has decided to run away, basically. I enjoyed that part of it, but the story that he is told by someone at the Holly Tree, which the Holly Tree is an inn that he's staying at, the story that he's told by a gentleman there was not, I wasn't really on board with it. It is actually what this artwork is from on the cover. The tale is told by a man who used to be a gardener for a rich manor, and the 5-year-old son, 5 or 6-year-old son, I think, was of the manor house, basically had a girlfriend who was also about 5 or 6 years old, and he runs away with her. Like, he just takes her in they go off in like a phaeton, I guess, and they run away, and it was just really odd, because they were making to elope, basically, and get married. And on the one hand, it's like, oh, that's kind of cute, little kids, they're so precocious. On the other hand, how things were handled and worded and how it was just really edging on kind of problematic and gross, because it's just children acting like adults, especially very small children acting like adults, which, I don't know, man. Maybe that was something that was more acceptable back in the day because kids grew up pretty fast, but here, now looking at it, in the modern age, it just ends up being a little, it makes me feel a little bit squeamish. So that one I did not really enjoy that much, because I think that while these stories are dated, of course, that one was dated in a bad way. But still, the other stories I found really enjoyable and kind of charming, so I did overall give this collection 4 stars. And the last book I read was just something that I use as kind of like a palette cleanser, I guess, for the end of the year. And that was diving into funny stories, which are collected by Michael Rosen. So this is a very worn collection of, you know, hilarious children's stories. That was something I really enjoyed when I was a kid. So I know I've said it before, but several months ago I came home with like a collection of my books from like childhood and teenage years, and I'm slowly like trying to reread them and see if they are books that I can find merit in, things that I still really enjoy, or things that I want to keep for when we have kids. If they are books that are arguably pretty terrible and I don't care to have them anymore. So basically I've been slowly making my way through those and seeing where things are pretty much. So this was just what I grabbed. There was some nostalgia from childhood in here. Some of these I loved revisiting. Some of them actually still kind of tickled me, and I found them to be pretty funny. So, the ones that I really liked, there was The Guest Who Ran Away, which is a folktale from Tunisia. It's pretty short and sweet and kind of funny. Stupid Marco by Jay Williams, that was also really funny. Sing Song Time by Joyce Grenfell is basically from the point of view of like a kindergarten teacher or something like that. Although I think it's English, so you guys don't call it kindergarten over there, do you? You call it nursery school, right? Is that what it is, I think? Primary, whatever. So that one's just, I mean, I've never been like a teacher, but I have had to deal with groups of children before, and I felt for that teacher. It was pretty funny. The Pudding Like a Night on the Sea by Anne Cameron is just, I don't know, it's an interesting look at family, and I found it enjoyable. The Lizard Letdown gave me feelings, because it's about a boy wanting to get a pet, and there's like a lizard, there's like a guinea pig, and it caught me in the feelings a little bit, just because I did have a guinea pig as a pet when I was a kid, and even though it's been years since then, he was a really cute little guy, and it just reminded me of him a lot, and I don't know. Hansel and Gretel is by Michael Rosen, and it is the most ridiculous take on Hansel and Gretel ever. It reminded me of, it's basically like the movie Airplane for kids, with like wordplay and ridiculous things. It's really funny. The Storyteller by Saki H.H. Munro was pretty good, because it's kind of dark. Children's tales, which I enjoy. The Enchanted Toad by Judy Corballis is, I think, my favorite out of the bunch, besides Hansel and Gretel, and it's because it's a different take on the Frog Prince. Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs is by Roald Dahl. It's one of his like fairy tale poems that he did in here, and I really like that. The others, there's a whole bunch of others in here that I either didn't find funny, or, I mean, they were all right, but it's just kind of like, meh, overall. Yeah, there were a couple that were not even remotely funny, and a couple that, in fact, were quite boring, and I just didn't finish reading them, because I was like, I mean, I want to read this as an adult. I can't imagine how I managed to read this story that's, I mean, only like 5 pages long, but how did I read this when I was like, you know, 10 or something? Like, one of them, which was a take on the Musicians of Bremen, I would say that one is, I mean, in my opinion, terrible. Yeah, it was kind of a nostalgia trip, and it was a nice palate cleanser to end the year on, basically, with ridiculous stories. So, yeah, I ended up giving this like 4 stars. So, yep, folks, that was everything that I read in December. Overall, not a bad month of reading. and not a bad way to end 2022. If you have ever read any of these books before, hey, let me know. If you have any that you can recommend based on like what I read and what I said about these, let me know too. Thank you so much for watching. If you are new here, please consider subscribing if you would, and I will see you guys in the next video. Bye!